I'm reading again from my book, Mind and Evolution, as assessed through reviews of major texts. Consilience, The Unity of Knowledge, by Edward O. Wilson, 1998. I originally titled this Consilience, How Big a Threat to the Humanities, but since in it I dealt quite fully with Wilson's book, I am treating it as a review. I wrote it in 2010. I haven't updated it. The crisis facing the humanities can be boiled down to a single word, consilience. A little history. Philosopher of science William Whewell introduced the word in 1840 to refer to instances of the same induction emerging in two or more different classes of facts. Over time, it began to be applied more generally to any two or more fields of knowledge turning out to have, or being given, the same basis. Fast forward to 1998. The term burst into public attention with publication of Consilience, The Unity of Knowledge by the biologist Edward O. Wilson. Wilson's premise was that a common body of principles forms the basis of the entire human endeavor. With great passion, he identified these principles with Darwinism. Turns out, Wilson's identification of Darwinism as the basis of all knowledge has inspired a program to rebuild the humanities on that basis. How's it going? Let's turn to another biologist, David Sloan Wilson. His Evolution for Everyone, How Darwin's Theory Can Change the Way We Think About Our Lives, shows how we can observe the principles of Darwinism in all kinds of situations. On his website, he outlines his mission. Quote, "The ivory tower would be more aptly named the Ivory Archipelago. It consists of hundreds of isolated subjects, each divided into smaller subjects in an almost infinite progression. Psychology, anthropology, economics, political science, sociology, history, art, literature, philosophy, gender studies, ethnic studies, and so on. Unity of knowledge," he says, "has always been the ideal of a liberal arts education and efforts to foster integration across disciplines. Unfortunately, these commonly held goals cannot be realized in the absence of a common language that can be spoken across disciplines. Evolutionary theory provides a common language, a single explanatory framework that can be used to organize knowledge across a diversity of subject areas. This integration took place in the biological sciences over the course of the 20th century, but only now is taking place for most human-related subjects." So that was David Sloan Wilson. To achieve that integration for most human-related subjects, Wilson created the Evolutionary Studies, EVOS, Consortium. Slogan: Advancing the Teaching of Evolution in Higher Education. From the EVOS website, quote, "The Evolutionary Studies Consortium is designed to facilitate the development and implementation of evolutionary studies programs at colleges and universities across the United States. An evolutionary studies program introduces students from all majors to evolutionary theory early in their academic careers, emphasizes human-related subjects in addition to biological, promotes the continuation of evolutionary training throughout the undergraduate education, and promotes faculty training and collaborative research related to evolution." End of quote. 36 colleges and universities were already members of the consortium as of 14 years ago. So the program to draw all the humanities into a consilience based on Darwinism is well advanced. I've 3 misgivings about basing the consilience on the sciences. First, the evidence for Darwinism being the primary mechanism driving evolution is insufficient to justify making it the basis of all human endeavor. Second, Darwinism, as currently advocated by its supporters, with its emphasis on competition and reproductive strategies, could be a baleful influence on the culture at large. Third, scientists seem to assume the point of the humanities is the same as for the sciences, explaining and accounting for things, rather than enhancing the self and enriching conscious experience. Here's an example of consilience thinking about evolution getting applied to human behavior, taken from Evolution and Human Behavior, a journal of the Human Behavior and Evolution Society, a major channel for communicating Darwinian evolutionary thinking in the US. The following are titles of articles in the current issue as I wrote this, November 2010. Notice the focus on issues to do with reproduction. Universal sex differences in online advertisers' age preferences, comparing data from 14 cultures and 2 religious groups. Fertility and race perception predict voter preference for Barack Obama. Fertility and the cycle predict women's interest in sexual opportunism. Men's facial masculinity predicts changes in their female partner's sexual interests across the ovulatory cycle, whereas men's intelligence does not. The effect of school performance upon marriage and the long-term reproductive success in 10,000 Swedish males and females born 1529. Facial symmetry in young girls and boys from a slum and a control area of Ankara, Turkey. Changes in pornography-seeking behaviors following political elections, an examination of the challenge hypothesis. The effect of paternal investment on female fertility intention in South Korea. Receptivity to sexual invitations from strangers of the opposite gender. With its focus on competition for scarce resources, including mates, the study of natural selection can be expected to include topics related to reproduction. Even so, the above list of titles is almost a travesty of these characterizations. Are the humanities being invited to adopt such a relentless focus on sex? An indication of how far physicalism has come to influence expert opinion about human nature comes from a survey of evolutionists carried out by the American scientist 2003 Cornell Evolution Project. 79% of the respondents, these are evolutionists, billed themselves as metaphysical naturalists. They were strongly materialist and monist. 73% said organisms have only material properties. 14% said they believed humans do not have free will. Can the humanities join in a consilience with such a bias against volition? Joining in a consilience based on Darwinism, I see as nothing more nor less than an embrace of barbarism. It's scary to imagine the authority of science imposing such a consilience on cultures all around the world. I hope the offer of a consilience based on Darwinism and physicalism ends up being as short-lived and unsuccessful as the earlier offer made the humanities of a consilience based on behaviorism. If the humanities and the sciences are to join in a consilience, I suggest the humanities fashion it. Two profound mysteries resist the methods of science. One is life in general. The other is conscious volition. I suggest the humanities apply their methods to form a consilience connecting these two mysteries, and offer it to the sciences to free them from the straitjacket their denial of volition confines them to. Then Edward O. Wilson's call for the unification of all knowledge would be fulfilled. Finally, to round out my review of Wilson's Consilience, some quotes. Quote, "Given that human action comprises events of physical causation, why should the social sciences and humanities be impervious to consilience with the natural sciences? Consilience of causal explanation is the means by which a single mind can travel most swiftly and surely from one part of the communal mind to the other. Science, its imperfections notwithstanding, is the sword in the stone that humanity finally pulled. The question it poses of universal and orderly materialism is the most important that can be asked in philosophy and religion. All that has been learned empirically about evolution in general and mental process in particular suggests that the brain is a machine assembled not to understand itself but to survive. Because these two ends are basically different, the mind, unaided by factual knowledge from science, sees the world only in little pieces. Science throws a spotlight on those portions of the world it must know in order to live to the next day, and surrenders the rest to darkness. Virtually all contemporary scientists and philosophers expert on the subject agree that the mind, which comprises consciousness and rational process, is the brain at work. They have rejected the mind-brain dualism of René Descartes. The brain and its satellite glands have now been probed to the point where no particular site remains that can reasonably be supposed to harbor a non-physical mind. For the first time, the really important questions are asked in a form that can be answered. What are the cellular events that comprise the mind? Not create the mind, too vague that expression, but compose the mind. Because the individual mind cannot be fully known and predicted, the self can go on passionately believing in its own free will. And that is a fortunate circumstance. Confidence in free will is biologically adaptive. Without it, the mind, imprisoned by fatalism, would slow and deteriorate. Thus, in organism, time and space, in every operational sense that applies to the knowable self, the mind does have free will. Note his confident claim, that's the end of quotes. Note his confident claim, because the individual mind cannot be fully known and predicted, the self can go on passionately believing in its own free will. Doesn't it also follow from this? The opposite is also true. It can also never be proved to operate on a purely physicalist basis.